Hi, everyone. This is Bowen Yang.
And I'm Matt Rogers,
co-host of the podcast Las Culturistas. We're inviting you to treat yourself with the gift of pleasure.
Oh, yes. Trojan Ecstasy Ultra Ribbed has a unique design that actually lets you feel the pleasure, not the condom.
That's all I've ever wished for on my birthday.
Scorpio Queen, horned up king. And with ultra smooth premium lubricant and extra deep ribs to increase stimulation, both partners are sure to experience ecstasy.
Pick up some Trojan Ecstasy Ultra Ribbed condoms, triple tested and trusted for over 100 years.
Trojan, feel your best. Get yours on.
Emma, what are you researching now?
Birthday gifts. Safa has the best mattresses in every category. So how about one for everybody?
Mattresses?
A customizable Air for mom and dad who can't agree on firmness. A 5-pound memory foam for your sister's college all-nighters. An all-natural latex for your yoga teacher. A Safa Youth for my growing nephews.
And a classic inner spring for us.
I got you a tie. Get $200 off your purchase of $1,000 or more at safa.com/200.
Welcome to Scary Time by Indie Drop-In Network. Each week we feature an episode from the best independent creators. Subscribe for great scary content. If you would like to help Indie Drop-In support indie creators, you can buy us a coffee. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/indie drop-in or click the link in the show notes below. Today's episode is from Behind the Bottom Line. Behind the Bottom Line are quirky stories about the funny, sad, and strange people hiding behind the numbers on the bottom line. If you like this episode of Behind the Bottom Line, make sure to check the show notes for links to subscribe and follow on social media. Enjoy the show.
Begin.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, wherever you are in the world. I'm James Schofield, the creator of the stories in the podcast Behind the Bottom Line. These are quirky stories about the funny, sad, and strange people that I've met over the years while doing business around the world. This story is an unnerving one called Vixen. Colin Sutherland is rich, charming, and successful. He has a loving wife and 2 adorable children waiting for him at home in Ireland when he flies back from his job as an investment banker in Frankfurt for Christmas. He has everything under control. But has he really? See what you think. Chapter 1: Home for Christmas. We'd like to thank you for flying with Lufthansa to Shannon Airport today. We wish you a pleasant onward journey and hope you have a happy holiday season. We look forward to welcoming you on Lufthansa again in the new year. As the engines died, there was the normal clickety-clack of seat belts being unclipped and overhead lockers being opened. As always, Colin Sutherland stayed in his first-class seat reading his Financial Times as the passengers from cattle class trampled past. "Mr. Sutherland," said the flight attendant, "your car is waiting for you on the tarmac." Colin looked up and gave her his charming smile. "Thank you, my dear. Could you just pass me my bag from the locker, please?" As she stretched upwards for the slim leather briefcase, his eyes lingered on her blouse, moving only as she looked down again. "Thank you." He paused to read her name tag. "Julia. Merry Christmas to you." As his driver set off, he stretched out in the back and gave a little sigh of contentment. He was pleased to be back home for Christmas and relieved the rather difficult Frankfurt situation had been resolved. The situation had been a team assistant in the office, Yasmin Tilke, who'd threatened to go to human resources with a ridiculous allegation of sexual harassment. Yes, maybe he'd been a bit persistent in pursuing her at the beginning of their relationship. Yes, maybe he'd hinted that she'd get a permanent contract at the bank if she was cooperative. But that was all just part of the game, wasn't it? And how could he have been harassing someone who agreed to go with him for a long weekend in the Sud Tirol? It wasn't like he locked her in the boot of his car. It was during that long weekend that he'd realised Yasmin was more trouble than she was worth. She took antidepressants and bored him during dinner with stories about previous disastrous relationships. So when he got back to the office, he instructed HR not to extend her provisional contract. There'd been a nasty scene when she found out about this, and that was when she tried to threaten him. But of course, she had no proof any harassment had taken place. Colin made it a rule in his little affairs never to be photographed or to write anything he wouldn't be able to show his wife. He could write a book about managing such things. Perhaps he would one day. Well, he thought Yasmin had seen sense after he'd explained this all to her. He'd promised to give her a good reference, which was funny because he only knew about her bedroom performance and he was never going to put that on paper. Eventually she'd nodded, dried her eyes, told him he was an arsehole and left. But that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the woman police officer who came to his office the following week to tell him that Yasmin had gone missing. Her family were putting a lot of pressure on the police to find her. Because he had been one of the last people at the bank to have talked to her, they wanted to know about her state of mind. "She's mentally quite fragile," the police officer said. "Her parents are worried." Colin was proud of his performance during the interview. He should have been an actor. "Oh, that was terrible," he'd said. "Her poor parents." Yes, she'd been upset about her contract not being extended, but, he'd explained, HR were going to write her a glowing reference. She seemed happy with that and perfectly calm when she left. "I can't think of anything that we at the bank could have done differently," Colin said. "Ms. Tilke was satisfactory, but HR felt, it was time for her to move on." The police officer looked up from her notepad as he said that. He'd given her his charming smile and added just a hint of sadness to it. She finished scribbling her notes, thanked him for his help, and left. The countryside outside the comfortable BMW was now wilder, with only occasional lights from solitary farmhouses. The family house was on the far west coast of Ireland, near the sea. Shannon Airport was Colin's escape to Frankfurt, where he spent most of his time, only returning every second weekend and for holidays. His wife, Flora, hadn't liked him being away so much, but as he told her, the money he earned as an investment fund manager would allow him to retire at 40 and then think of the fun they could have. His 40th birthday had been 5 years ago. Flora had long given up asking about his early retirement plans. The truth was, he grew bored if he was too long in Galway and was glad to leave after a weekend. However, it was nice to visit, and it was an excellent place to store his wife and 2 daughters, leaving him free to pursue other interests. As the car approached Oyster Bay where they lived, the roads became narrow and the driver had to go slowly. Near the entrance to the house driveway, Colin saw 2 bright eyes flash at him out of the darkness. A fox, he thought. Probably after Flora's chickens. Maybe over the holidays he'd take a gun and see if he could shoot it, though the girls, Daisy and Fiona, would object. At 9 and 10 they were still sentimental about such things. As the car stopped outside the house, his daughters ran out of the front door and jumped into his arms, squeaking with excitement and covering his face with sticky kisses. They'd plainly been eating bread and jam for their tea. He hugged them and carried them inside where Flora was waiting. He gave her a kiss, put the girls down, and tipped the driver who was following with his bags. "Thank you, Michael," he said. "Pick me up on January the 6th, will you? Normal time. I'll need rescuing from these rascals by then." Sitting down for some tea with the girls and Flora was the moment he liked best when coming home. They petted him, told him how much they'd missed him, and at Christmas there were the presents he'd brought to be added to the pile under the tree. Buying presents was something Colin prided himself on. He'd picked out these ones together with Yasmin, he remembered. She'd been amazed at his enthusiasm for the task and told him he was a good father. He felt a slight pang. He may have been acting for the police inspector in his office, but it was a terrible thing to think of someone so young and alive being missing, maybe dead. He shivered. "Time for bed, girls," said Flora. "If you ask your father nicely, maybe he'll read you a story while I make our dinner." For the next hour there was the normal bedtime ritual of pyjama hunting, teeth brushing, and finally a chapter of Winnie the Pooh. He did different voices for the characters, which made the girls giggle. When he'd finished, he put them in bed, turned off the light, and was about to go when Fiona sat up. "Listen," she said. From outside there came a strange wailing noise. The girls jumped up and put their heads under the curtains to look out the window. "Look, Daddy," said Daisy, "it's our fox. You can see her in the moonlight." Colin joined them, and there, walking along the low stone wall which separated the garden from a field, was a vixen. She turned and looked up at the window, and Colin saw her eyes flash at him, them, as they caught the light. "She started visiting us recently. We put bread out for her on the lawn," explained Fiona. "Your mother won't like that," he said. "What about the chickens?" "Oh, Daddy, don't be silly," said Daisy scornfully. "That's why we do it, so she isn't hungry and tries to eat the chickens." "Isn't she beautiful?" said Fiona softly, as the vixen sprang lightly down from the wall, trotted across the lawn, and picked up one of the rolls he could now see had been placed there. "We call her Princess Jasmine, you know, after the princess in Aladdin." Colin jumped and pulled the girls away from the window. "That's enough now," he said. "Into bed." Downstairs, Flora was busy cooking. "Will you pour us a drink?" she said. "And there are some letters for you on the table." He took her a glass of wine, poured himself a whiskey, and went to look at the post. It was mostly Christmas cards from relatives and a few credit card bills, but at the bottom of the pile was an envelope with a German stamp on it, and no sender address. He paused for a moment, suddenly nervous, then tore it open. Inside was a picture postcard, but with no written message. It showed the hotel he had taken Yasmin to in the Südtirol, the Hotel Dolomiten. Outside in the field beyond the garden, the fox screamed once into the darkness. Chapter 2. Frankfurt Calling. Colin didn't sleep well that night, his mind busy with the significance of the postcard. He assumed it came from Yasmin, but could he be sure? Of course it was from her. She must have bought it in the hotel as a souvenir. But why hadn't she written anything? But then again, what could she have written? What was there to say? She must have posted it after their conversation in his office, just to scare him. But then what? Was she hiding? Had she had an accident or killed herself? Should he tell the police that something had come from her? Then again, he didn't know for sure it was from her, did he? But if it wasn't from her, who else? At some point his exhausted brain gave up and he fell asleep. "Daddy, here's some tea." Fiona was standing next to the bed, and downstairs he could smell breakfast being got ready. She climbed onto the bed. "Mummy wants you to look after us while she goes Christmas shopping in Galway for the day," she said. "Would you like that?" "I'd love that, sweetheart. What's the weather like?" "Sunny, breezy, with a chance of rain," she answered, imitating the local radio weather forecaster. "Brilliant." He dressed, ate his breakfast, and then they waved Flora goodbye as she drove off in her Range Rover. "Right," he told the girls. "First stop, I want to check the chickens are all right." They were. Flora, who came from a large farming family, knew how to make a hen coop fox-proof. They collected some eggs and put them in the kitchen, then climbed over the stone wall at the end of the garden and went down to the cliffs to walk along the path beside the Atlantic. The cliffs weren't high at Oyster Bay, but there were nasty rocks at their foot, and Colin grew anxious as the children skipped ahead. He was about to tell them to stay close to him when Fiona gave a cry and stopped still, pointing at something white spread across the grass near the edge of the cliff. Colin and Daisy hurried over, and there, surrounded by its feathers, was the torn-off head of a seagull. "And that," said Colin, "is what your lovely fox would do to the chickens given half a chance." "Yes, Daddy," explained Fiona patiently, "which is why we have to put the bread out at night for Princess Jasmine so she leaves them alone." "But Mummy also says we must always make sure the door to the hen coop is properly shut," continued Daisy. "Otherwise she might be tempted." They carried on for a while, but the wind had brought some clouds with it, and before the rainy part of the weather forecast started, they headed home. Colin stopped by the wall into their garden where he had first seen the Vixen. "Where's her lair, then?" he asked. But the girls didn't know. Somewhere on the cliffs, they thought, but they'd never found it. Colin climbed on top of the wall and looked around. "Sometimes you can see foxes in the daytime too," he said. "Have you seen her in daylight?" They hadn't. "I think you're in love with Princess Jasmine," said Daisy. "You ask so many questions about her." Then, screaming with laughter, the girls ran back into the house. Feeling slightly ridiculous, Colin followed and made some lunch. Outside it started to rain. By 4 o'clock it was getting dark already. The girls had gone upstairs to play, and Colin was dozing by the fire when the telephone rang. Expecting Flora, Colin picked it up. "Hello, is that Mr. Sutherland?" said a woman with a slight German accent. "This is Inspector Regina Huttel from the Frankfurt police. We spoke to each other a couple of weeks ago about the disappearance of Jasmin Tilke. Sorry to call you just before Christmas, but I wanted to ask you a couple more questions. Is this convenient?" For a moment, Colin was tempted to tell her to call back later and then disconnect the phone, but that would seem strange. He didn't need the police to start looking too hard at his connection to Jasmin. "No, that's fine," he answered. "Happy to help." "Thank you. So, first of all, her family and friends here still haven't received any kind of message from Ms. Tilke that might indicate she's safe, or worst case, that she's thinking about suicide. Has anything been sent to your house in Ireland by any chance?" He hesitated for a heartbeat. Should he tell her about the postcard? No. Who said it was actually from Jasmin? Let's not encourage her. "Sorry, nothing from Miss Tilke seems to have been sent here as far as I can tell." "Probably not suicide then. There's nearly always some sort of message to somebody from suicide victims, you know," said the policewoman. "Really? Well, now, Inspector, if you don't mind, I have to look after my 2 daughters and... daughters, eh? I bet they're a handful if they're like mine. Well, I won't keep you, Mr. Sutherland. Just one more question." "Yes?" "Have you ever stayed at a hotel in the Südtirol called Hotel Dolomiten?" Colin felt sick. "Not that I recall," he answered carefully. "But I have been to the area several times with my wife, so it's possible. Why?" "We had a look in Miss Tilke's apartment. In the bathroom there were some shampoos and soaps from that hotel." Colin remembered now. Jasmin had taken all the soaps and shampoos she could lay her hands on. "Which surprised us because it's a pretty expensive hotel. I would think it's outside her price range." There followed a silence. Colin thought he could hear his heart beating. "I'm sorry, but I'm not quite sure what that has to do with me," he said finally. "Are you suggesting something? Because if so, my lawyers will be in touch with you straight after Christmas and— Not at all, Mr. Sutherland, answered Inspector Hootle. Though I find it interesting you start talking about lawyers. But do you know if there was anybody at the bank that Miss Tilke was having a relationship with? Really, Inspector, I have no interest in the private life of our staff. This is absolutely outrageous. I shall ask my— No need, Mr. Sutherland, no need. I just thought that if you did know anything, it could be helpful. Because we also found a used pregnancy test in her bathroom rubbish bin. But I'll leave you to your family. Please accept my apologies for disturbing you. Goodbye. The phone went dead. Colin put down the receiver slowly and stared blankly at the wall, his mind racing around the information the policewoman had given him. Pregnancy test? Was it positive? Hootle hadn't said, and he could hardly ring back and ask her. He'd handled the call badly. He should never have talked about lawyers. He made himself look suspicious. Why had he— Daddy! Daddy! Daisy was shouting from the top of the stairs. Come quick! It's Princess Jasmine! Colin ran up the stairs, 2 steps at a time, and looked out of the girl's window. Sitting on the wall and watching the house intently was the fox. Inside Colin something snapped. He pulled up the window and leant out as far as he could. Fuck off! He screamed into the rain. Just fuck off out of here! In one supple movement, the Vixen jumped off the wall and ran back across the field in the direction of the cliffs. Colin slammed the window shut and turned around, his heart racing. Behind him, he found Flora, the 2 girls clutching her in fright. Colin, said Flora, whatever's the matter with you?
Hey guys, it's Anders.
Blake. And Adam from TV's Workaholics and the podcast This Is Important and the Pleasure Is Ours. We'd like to invite you to treat your friends and loved ones right by gifting them something from Trojan, America's #1 condom brand.
Trojan Bearskin Raw is America's thinnest latex condom, which helps you enjoy a more natural experience to feel it all.
Yeah, the older I get, the less feeling I have in my penis, and I just need the thinnest condom possible.
You have less feeling?
Yeah, it's slipping.
Because you jerk off with sandpaper?
Yeah, it's just getting numb down there. So hook everyone you know up with some Trojan Bearskin Raw condoms, triple tested and trusted for over 100 years. Release the bear. Get grizzly with it. Bitch better have my honey.
Trojan, feel your best? Get yours on.
Chapter 3. Magic. It was stress at work, he told Flora when they were on their own. The fund he managed had been performing poorly, and he wasn't sure if he was going to get his normal bonus this year. And the fox? She asked. The fox made him nervous, he explained. Shouldn't they worry about rabies? What if it bit one of the girls or something? Or the chickens? It hadn't done anything yet, but who knew when that might change? How about he put some of that rat poison they had inside the stale bread the girls put out at night? Flora pooh-poohed his worries. There was no rabies in Ireland, and anyway, poisoning foxes was illegal. Calm down, Colin. You're not a country person. You don't understand these things, she told him. It's like my grandfather used to say, feed Mr. Fox or he'll feed himself. We've done our bit and she'll do hers. Now, come downstairs. We'll have some tea and decorate the Christmas tree. And stop worrying about work. So what if you don't get a bonus this year? We've got enough money already. You know we have. You could retire tomorrow and we'd still have enough. The next day was Christmas Eve, and although Colin remained jumpy, there were no more phone calls, and the fox stayed away as well. They went to midnight mass in the village church, and afterwards, while the children tried to go to sleep, Colin and Flora stuffed presents into Christmas stockings for them. Then there was the usual chaos on Christmas morning of presents and overexcited small girls before they went to Flora's parents for lunch, and Colin spent the afternoon nodding, smiling, and being polite to the huge family that always gathered there. Colin drove them home when it was time, the children asleep in the back and Flora next to him in the front. It was a long, empty road which went up and down across the hilly countryside. Fog had collected in the little valleys, but the tops of the hills were completely clear. Just as they neared Oyster Bay, the fog cleared again as they went up the last hill, when... "Colin, watch out!" Flora screamed. Caught in the headlights in the middle of the road was the Vixen. Colin braked hard, but it was too late, and the car went straight through where she was standing before stopping. They both jumped out to find... nothing. "What the fuck just happened?" said Colin, panic making his voice go high. "Where did she go? Did you hear anything?" Flora shook her head. "No, nothing. I didn't even feel a bump or anything. Did you?" "Nothing. I must have hit her, though. I must have." They looked at the front of the car and underneath it. There were no marks, no blood, no sign of any collision, nor was there anything on the side of the road. Then, from some distance away in the dark, came the weird, eerie cry of a fox. Colin felt afraid. "Jesus!" said Flora. "That must be her. She must have jumped sideways at the last moment. That was lucky. The girls would have been so upset." "Can we go home?" said Colin, his voice shaking. "It's really cold out here." Flora looked at him carefully. "Let me drive the rest of the way," she said. "You look a bit shocked." They climbed back into the car. The girls were now awake and demanding explanations. They were not surprised that Princess Jasmine had escaped. "She can do magic," said Daisy with great certainty. "We saw her disappear once before." "Really?" asked Flora. "When was that?" "It was after we'd gone to bed, a couple of days before Daddy came home. She was just taking one of the rolls in the garden when you went down the stairs, turned on the kitchen light, and poof, she was gone." "Well, magic would explain why I've never seen her before tonight," said Flora. "You've never seen her?" asked Colin, surprised. "Nor heard her?" "No. Tonight was the first time Her Highness let me see or hear her. It was you that told me about her, wasn't it, Fiona?" "Yes, Mummy didn't believe us at first. It was only when she saw that the old bread was being taken." "And the dead rats," added Daisy. "Yeah, that was the strangest thing," said Flora. "Fiona had told me about her, but I wasn't sure because I'd never seen or heard anything. Well, of course I was worried about the chickens. So I remembered what we'd always been told as kids about feeding Mr. Fox, and I thought we'd give it a try. Anyway, the night after we started putting stale bread out, I found 3 dead rats lined up outside the hen coop, and we haven't had any more trouble with rats or mice stealing chicken feed since then. So I got rid of the rat poison." "Anyway," concluded Daisy, "that's why I think Princess Jasmine can disappear magically." "Or she's a ghost," said Fiona, trying to frighten her sister. "Mummy!" wailed Daisy. Colin twisted round in his seat and smacked them both. "Just stop it!" he shouted. "Shut up now!" "That's enough," screamed Flora. "All of you be quiet." The girls looked at their father in shock, and silent tears ran down their cheeks. When they got home, they asked their mother to put them to bed. Colin sat in the kitchen, feeling ashamed of himself, and went out to the hen coop to collect the daily eggs before going into the study to get himself a whiskey. On his desk, the answering machine was flashing its little red light. With a feeling of dread, he went over and found 3 messages. He pressed the play button. Mr. Sutherland. Inspector Huttel from the Frankfurt Police Presidium. Sorry to call on Christmas Day. I'll call back later. Mr. Sutherland. Inspector Huttel. I think you'll want to talk to me. I'll call back later. Mr. Sutherland. Inspector Huttel again. I'll call again tomorrow. It's about Yasmin Tilke. There have been developments you should know about. Goodbye. Who on earth is Inspector Huttel, and what does she want to talk to you about? Demanded Flora, who came into the study in time to hear the last message. Colin explained what had happened to Yasmin without compromising himself. Why was she ringing on Christmas Day? Colin shrugged. That was Germans for you, he said. They weren't going to let a little thing like Christmas get in the way of doing their work. Weird. Anyway, what just happened back there in the car is never going to happen again. Have you got that? The conversation developed into a huge row about why Colin was still working in Frankfurt 5 years after he'd promised to stop. He knew he didn't have a strong case, which was why eventually he lost his temper and said if he had to stay in Oyster Bay with her and the children all the time, he'd die of boredom. At this point, Flora threw her tea in his face, told him to sleep on the sofa, and went to bed alone. Colin wiped his face, found himself a blanket and a pillow, and lay down. Sleep was, of course, impossible. That bitch Huttel. She was a torturer, leaving little cryptic messages for him. She must have done it on purpose. And ringing him on Christmas Day. Flora was right about that. Was it really necessary to... And that was when he heard noises coming from the hen coop. Chapter 4. Death in the Night. Colin was still fully clothed, so he flung on a coat, then grabbed Flora's shotgun and a handful of cartridges from the gun case in the study. He opened the back door quietly, careful not to turn on any lights that might warn the fox. Let's see how magic she is with some lead inside her, he thought. Keeping low, he crept towards the hen coop, which was a short distance away from the house. It was quite misty, so he couldn't see much, but he could hear noises from the hens, which suddenly turned into a cacophony of squawks as an intruder emerged through the hen coop door, dragging a victim behind it. Colin raised the shotgun and let off a shot. There was a dreadful noise, and then something raced across the grass towards the wall. He let off another shot as it got to the top, blasting it over and onto the other side. A window upstairs was thrown open, and Flora put her head outside. "Colin, what are you doing?" she shouted, but he didn't answer. He scrambled onto the wall and looked down triumphantly, expecting to find the dead Vixen. But lying on the grass was something long and black instead. He picked it up by the tail. It was a mink, one of the thousands which had bred from mink escaping from fur farms in the 1960s. He trudged back towards the house. Flora was by the hen coop where pieces of the chicken he'd blasted were scattered. She turned on him as he got near. "I thought," he started. "Clean this up," she hissed. "You've shot our best hen." "But... have you killed Princess Jasmine? If you have, we'll never forgive you." "I'm sorry, it was just one of those feral minks. It was in the..." "Sorry isn't good enough. If you'd shut the hen coop door properly this evening, this wouldn't have happened, would it? And don't touch my shotgun again. Ever. You're completely irresponsible." She slammed the door behind her as she went back inside, taking the shotgun with her. It took some time to clear up the mess, and it wasn't until 3 o'clock that he was finally lying on the sofa again. Once more he began to speculate about what Huttel could possibly have to say, and the last time he looked at his watch, it was just before 6. Ring, ring. Ring, ring. Ring, ring. Colin opened a bleary eye and looked at his watch. It was 7 o'clock in the morning. He fell off the sofa and staggered to the telephone. Hello? Good morning, Mr. Sutherland. This is Inspector Huttel. I hope you had a nice Christmas. Did your daughters have a great time? It's 7 o'clock in the morning, he croaked. I had a maximum of 1 hour's sleep last night. What do you want? Oh, yes, I forgot. You're an hour behind, aren't you? We need to talk again about Yasmin Tilka. Why, what's happened? Well, I told you about the pregnancy test, didn't I? Did I say it was positive? Anyway, we pulled in her ex-boyfriend for questioning. You were working over Christmas? Evil doesn't take a holiday, Mr. Sutherland, so yes, we were. But that wasn't any good. He had an alibi for the time she went missing. So then we got in touch with the Hotel Dolomiten. Colin froze. And I sent them pictures of Yasmin. Now, guess what they told me? For a minute, there was silence. Look, Inspector, said Colin. Yes, I was there with Yasmin, but I had nothing to do with her disappearance. I'm being honest with you. Well, Mr. Sutherland, I find it very hard to believe in your honesty. You've lied to me, you're lying to your family, and you probably lied to Yasmin Tilka as well. At the moment, you're our prime suspect in her disappearance. But I'm innocent. I know nothing about it, I swear. In that case, Mr. Sutherland, you won't mind coming to Frankfurt, so I can interview you properly, will you? You can't make me. She laughed. Of course I can. Either you come of your own free will, or I'll send the Garda to arrest you at home, and I'll put you on a plane in handcuffs. Would you like that? But my family. What am I going to tell them? That's not my business, Mr. Sutherland, but I suggest you start telling them the truth. It might be painful, but it's the best thing to do. It'll destroy my marriage. She'll never forgive me. And the children. Inspector Huttel sighed. Listen, I have another family here that are desperate to find their daughter, who has been missing for nearly a month. I'm sorry for your wife and children, but I really don't care about you. This is your problem. I expect you here tomorrow morning for an interview, or I'm sending in the Garda. She hung up. For about 5 minutes, Colin sat weeping into his hands. When he looked up, he found Flora sitting in a chair opposite him, waiting for him to finish. So, she said, I heard the last bit. I think you'd better tell me what I'm never going to forgive. He nodded. Yes, things can't get any worse, I suppose. He was wrong about that. After he'd explained everything and answered all Flora's questions, she told him exactly what she thought of him. Then she packed some bags for her and the children and left. She forbade him to touch, even say goodbye to them. He felt as if his heart was being ripped in two. Colin sat in the kitchen, staring out of the window for some time. Eventually he got out his computer and booked a flight to Frankfurt for that evening. He spent the rest of the day organising his affairs and arranging for a lawyer to accompany him to the police interview. It was dark when it was time to leave for the airport. He put his bag in the back of his car and set off. Foggy on the road again, he noted. He'd have to drive carefully. Back inside the empty house, the telephone rang 3 times, and then the answering machine went on. Mr. Sutherland, this is Inspector Huttle. You don't need to fly over to be interviewed. We've finally found Yasmin Tilke's body. She hung herself in a lock-up facility about 3 weeks ago. She left a letter. I won't share the details, but let's just say she blames you for her decision. Unfortunately, we can't prosecute you for this, but I wanted you to know you were responsible. Have a happy life. Some distance away, Colin was now driving along the same hilly road as the previous evening. Valley fog, hilltop clear. Valley fog, hilltop clear. Valley fog. And then, standing there in front of him, at the top of the hill, was Yasmin, dressed exactly as he'd last seen her, waiting. He thought for a millisecond about braking, but dismissed the idea. He knew it was all over. The emergency services got there shortly after the crash, but there was nothing to be done. Colin's neck was broken. "Hit a fox, see?" said the paramedic, pointing at the Vixen, whose body lay bloody and broken on the side of the road, and just piled into that tree. Didn't even try to stop. That's the end of Vixen, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to hear more of my stories, subscribe on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, or whichever podcast player you prefer. You can also find more information on my website, www.behindthebottomline.com, and I hope you'll be in touch soon. Until then, this is James Schofield saying, take care and goodbye.
Thanks again for listening to Scary Time by Indie Drop-In Network. Check out all of Indie Drop-In's shows at indiedropin.com. If you would like your show featured, reach out to us at Indie Drop-In on all social media or go to indiedropin.com.
To show you how easy it is to file a claim with Geico, we hired a nature show host.
In the native habitat of a suburban driveway, the poor victim of a broken windshield is left assessing his vehicle, utterly helpless.
Well, not true. If he's got Geico, he can file a claim online, over the phone, or with his handy mobile app.
But like a lone gazelle, he'll suddenly be left to fend for himself, awaiting his terrible fate.
Nope. Geico will assign him a designated claims team to help him out too.
So the gazelle gets his car fixed and everything. Wow, nature is so cool.
Geico. Great service without all the drama.